Welcome to the Why Not Real Estate Podcast, where you will learn top strategies from world-class real estate investors, both large and small. Why not? Tune in and get started today.
Learn to raise money, but recognize that you have to, it isn't just about networking and talking stuff up or spewing stuff on the web. You have to learn to raise money because the limit to how much you can do is a function of how much you can raise. There's always motivated sellers. The motivated sellers come from death, divorce, dependency on drugs and alcohol, job change, things like that. So people always have a personal reason why they need to sell more than they need to get best price. If they are under pressure to sell, you can say, look, I'm not going to help you out. You might as well go screw yourself, or I can solve your problem. You're not going to get the best price because I need to make a profit here. So if you take the view that there are times in people's lives when it's more important that they move on than it is that they wait for the best price, and they'll never know if the best price is the best price. Well, those are the motivated sellers, as we would call them. And motivated sellers are motivated not because of the real estate. They're motivated because of their life circumstances.
Hey, what's up, all of my real estate peeps? This is Brian Lucier with another episode of the Why Not Real Estate Podcast, where we interview real estate investors, both large and small. And today we have a special guest. This is actually my first time ever seeing this gentleman face to face. We've been texting back and forth, emailing back and forth for over a decade, almost 15, 16 years. And I was just blown away to have him here. I got a little bit of fanboy going on me here. He's a really sweet, generous gentleman for being on the show today, and I want to thank him in advance. But let me introduce him to you. Our guest today started working in the software industry, moving to Silicon Valley in 1982. He was there much longer before what we know and love today was created. He was part of the team that pushed Hewlett-Packard into the Unix market that led him joining Next Computer, where he took on various roles, including reporting directly to Steve Jobs. While leading the Next team at IBM, he met a young 19-year-old LinkedIn co-founder, Eric Lee, who asked our guest to beta test the new online service. In 1994, Swiss Bank Corp recruited him to its London office. His work there included leading global teams in all of the financial centers. Our guest's property career started early in 1984 after attending an evening event in San Jose, California, which led to a weekend course titled Nothing Down, which happened in San Francisco. Within 24 hours of that event, he had purchased a detached house for nothing down, using what he had learned over the prior 48 hours. Today, our guest is a multinational landlord with property ranging from Bradford to Hawaii, spanning 11 time zones, 2 oceans, and today broadcasting this show from the Caribbean. Ladies and gentlemen, all of my real estate peeps, it is my pleasure to welcome to the show the founder and mastermind behind Property Fortress, Mr. John B. Corey. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, how are you? And a little bit of fact check. I think on one of my random trips that I detoured into Massachusetts and actually met you and your wife.
Oh my goodness.
And that was more than 15 years ago, so it's a senior moment, I understand. But I do believe we met once somewhere near Worcester.
That very well could be. There were a lot of meetups and RIAs and landlord associations that I would...
Yeah, we had a meal together.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was like, and you have 2 sons, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and one of them, well, I know that from the photos, but one of them, I believe, was there. And I can't remember, I don't remember a lot of details. So again, it was probably 20 years ago or something. But yes, yeah, we did meet once, but we did a whole lot of communicating through emails and other things prior online, because you have this sort of empire near Worcester, and I went to college in Worcester, Mass, or as the Brits would say, university. And I had grown up in Lawrence, Mass. So we have a lot of sort of geographic overlaps. But I do have this fuzzy memory saying we actually met once prior to this live Zoom.
You have me on that one. I vaguely remember being at a restaurant, and I'm glad that you brought that up. And I'm happy to be wrong and say that we met before.
Well, I part of it was I think I'd flown in from California or something, and I got a rental car and I met you, and then I think I went on to where my parents were, and then I flew out and wherever I was going next. But yeah, there was this sort of what I call almost like a flying visit or a flyby.
A flyby. Yeah, that was way back when we were both active on what was at the time realestateinvestor.com.
Probably, yes.
Yeah.
Or actually CRE.com, which was the original website. See, I am the tech guy. The original real estate website was CRE.com. And I remember the founder, I spent some time in his house and other things. And that was back when it was text only communication. And there was that thing called Bigger Pockets where this guy living in his basement or something was trying to get it off the ground. And he, as he said later in one of his tribute recordings, well, yeah, I used to post as different people to make it look like there was more traffic. So yeah, he was sort of ghosting himself or pretending to be multiple versions of himself.
I'm not that savvy. It's just me. So, but that's a good clue. I might pick up on that. So
Yeah.
if it's okay with you, I'd love to jump in unless there's anything else you want to share getting started.
Yeah, well, the other thing is, so software engineer moves to Silicon Valley, works in software engineering for a long time at Hewlett Packard, then moves on to next. And something I learned maybe by osmosis or by accident or connecting the dots in your head, but you don't realize the language of it, is telling stories are important. And one of the things that happens is how you put together those stories. So then my life continues. I move on, and Steve Jobs gives his commencement speech at Stanford. And he says it's only when you look backwards that you can connect the dots. And you start to see what was important and how it was connected. Now, I also like to say it's when you look backwards, you can erase the dots that don't make any sense to the story. So there's an element of, poetic license and editing that goes on. But how you can deliver a story. And, I didn't know that meeting Eric when he was 19 later would lead to when he was 20 something, whatever. He's going to found this company. It's going to become a big deal. He asked a number of people that worked at Next to be beta testers. Well, we just did what we did. It was part of the journey. And it's only when you start to try to compress it down into 5 minutes, and I've probably just spoken for 5 minutes, but when you compress it down, then you do the high points because it gets people's attention.
Yeah, we realize that all the time. Someone will tell a story and they'll think, oh my goodness, you're an overnight success. And it only took 27 years.
Yes, yes.
So
here, Iacocca has a quote in his book about that. He was considered an overnight success because the Ford Mustang in 6 months went through the roof. It went, it was like a moonshot. But he goes, it took 10 years to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. So here we are. I'm on an island in the Caribbean. Where is your chair today? Where on earth are you?
So I tend not to answer that. And let me just give people a reason. So this is the Shard in London, sort of stands on top of London Bridge. And that's Guy's Hospital. If I move the mic. That's the sort of city of London, the financial district. There's a legal entity called the city. So my home office, my home in London, that's the view from the balcony. And because I primarily work with people in the UK, I try to keep the background constant. So then that way, no one worries about where I am and everybody focuses on the agenda. And in particular, when we had COVID, it started like people started to wake up to that we can do business without being co-located. We can do business being co-located. What matters is the deal. What matters is the structure. What matters is the contract and the relationships and the trust. But none of this stuff, oh, the next time you're in town, we'll get coffee and talk about what we might do together. It's like, why are we waiting? And it was quite refreshing when COVID happened for that point of view, that I, who live more or less in multiple locations and probably moving again later this year, there's a continuity to the relationships independent of what time zone I wake up in. So,
Well placed answer. So you are where you are, somewhere on the planet Earth, and that's good enough
yes.
for me. Thank you for being here.
It's also why I say good day when I start meetings. So I sort of borrow a little Australian. So we don't have to worry about, is it morning or evening where you are or I am? It's like, do we really care? How about just it's a greeting?
Yeah, that works for me.
Yep.
Let's roll out. So we know a little bit about your background, how you were in the software industry, how you got started, but I'm sure there's a story there. So typically I'll ask people, what did you used to do before real estate? And if you just want a bullet point, you've already done that, but just, I think we've hit all that, if you're okay.
Yeah, I mean, I can do it real quick. So I graduated in computer science and I switched from mechanical engineering to computer science because it was easier in the sense that you didn't have to deal with the real world. And um, I'm partially introverted, I'm partially extroverted, and I enjoy working with the computer rather than having to figure out people all the time. So I move out to Silicon Valley because that's where things are happening at the time. And this is 1982. And the computer sector, the tech sector is maybe number 14 in a list of 15 major industries or something. It wasn't a big deal other than those of us that were in it. There was, having a really successful public IPO meant maybe you raised 10 million or something. It was like rounding error in today's money. So after about a year and a half, something like that, it's like, well, I get paid reasonably well. I have some spare time. I read this book called Nothing Down. And then a number of months later, there was an infomercial on the TV. These are the things that you don't carry in your lap. They're on top of furniture, and it's plugged into something. So the guy's promoting it. It's an infomercial. And if you wanted to come to their live seminar at the Red Lion San Jose Airport, then guess what? We have a free cassette tape for you, 45 minutes aside. That was the bonus gift if you showed up. Call now, 800 1-800 something. Operators are standing by. I mean, this is dark ages. The phones were, they had tethers to the wall. And when you drove, you didn't have maps with you unless you bought a paper copy. So I go to the Red Lion, I go to the thing, and the speaker says, there's 7 ways to do such and such, and I'm going to cover 2 of them tonight. It's like, well, what about the other ones? And that happens 2 or 3 times. I hadn't been to one of these seminars before. Well, sure enough, for $490 something, we have 2-day training coming up on the weekend. If you run to the back, maybe you didn't say run because I don't really recognize anyone running, but I did buy it and I drove there on Saturday and Sunday and took the course and all the rest. So these days we call it a side hustle. By the way, back then there was no house hack. There was none of this lingo, but people bought houses, fixed them up, refinanced them, whatever, but we didn't have the cool label house hack. So we didn't have, side hustle. We just had what you did when you're not working. So that was 1983, November. I found the receipt recently when I dug out the book. I was surprised I had organized it well. I put the receipt in the book. And it's like, imagine that. John's not normally that organized. So here I am being a software engineer, Hewlett Packard, and starting to look at real estate. And I ended up buying this house, as you said. And the interesting thing was I was sharing a house was 4 bedrooms, 5 people. There was a couple and 3 other singles. And I was able to move out of that house into a house that I own, the one I was buying. and rent the other 2 bedrooms and get some tax deductions. This is more or less the age of Ronald Reagan and tax deduction. And it actually cost me less to own the house than it did to rent the bedroom.
Huh.
Now, I was 20 miles south of where I worked versus 11 miles west. It wasn't quite as nice, but it wasn't bad. And I was the owner. It's like, okay, this works. So that was the start. That was, the dark ages. When people called you and you wanted to go see their property, you actually had to open up a map and figure out where it was. And when you went to see it, that means you weren't getting phone calls because the phone couldn't travel with you.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
Dark ages.
All of my peeps out there, you have no idea how easy you have it today.
Oh, and there was no online information.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you had to go to a brokerage or a realtor or something and then beg
Yeah.
them to get back to you.
When I went to look at this house, I took the course and I thought, I'm pretty sure there's a real estate office down the hill from where I was living, the rental place. So I walked down the hill into Los Gatos, and sure enough, yep, I was correct. My memory had served me well that there is a real estate office. And on a Monday morning, the top agent is not working. So I get whoever's on call that day. And it's an older gentleman looking at me now. Maybe he's my age, maybe he's a little older. I don't know. So he takes out a book, a piece of, this thing with paper and a cover, front and back. And that was the MLS. It was once a week, they got a new book. Now, maybe they could have used a computer. I don't know. But I know he definitely took out a book. Sure enough, we looked at 3 properties. I made an offer to buy one. I had it accepted all that day. Boom, boom, boom. Now, here's a little funny tidbit tying the stories back together. You said earlier, detached house. The reason there's the word detached in that write-up that you were reading is because in Britain, it means something slightly different than in the US. So we're slightly tweaking the verbiage, the words, so that the British listener will understand, where in the US, you would say a house, and of course it's attached. If it wasn't, you call it a duplex, triplex, or something, but all houses are detached in the US is the assumption. Where in Britain, that's not quite true. A lot of the houses they're in a row or they share a wall or something. So yeah, you had to learn as my career progressed to use language that made sense on both sides of the pond.
Very good. So it was a single family home, standalone.
Yeah, it was a 3 bedroom, 2 bathroom, 2 car garage, track home, San Jose, California, Santa Teresa district.
So you have the book in hand, no money down, you have the receipt from 1983. Were there any other influences? I know that you had a tech background, training, education. Were there any other influences in your life as you were starting out, or any other family members who may have directed you towards real estate?
I wouldn't say directed, and I would largely answer no. Though if I was fishing, I could say, well, my grandfather on my mother's side was a carpenter, but by the time I knew him, he was fully retired and he was renting his house, he and my grandmother. There wasn't really a history of anyone owning rental properties in the family. The plumber down the road, he had some rental properties, but there was no real connection. Funny enough, though, after I purchased the home and then later there's a second one and some other things, I end up living with and marrying this woman who grew up in San Francisco, and she's American born Chinese. And that community in that part of San Francisco, like they all seem to have couples where one has a job at a good corporate and benefits and medical coverage, and the other is an entrepreneur son, but they all tend to have multiple properties. And they scrimp and save, they move out of the family home, turn it into a rental, buy the next one without selling the first one or something. But I was like, whoa, there's a pattern to this. And maybe this makes more sense than I thought.
So you had that as an influence. And how did
Well, it
you,
was an influence after the fact, though. I've already well established with 2, 3 properties by that point. But it was interesting to see almost like a different culture in the sense of the people who grew up with real estate versus the people who didn't. When I grew up in Lawrence, Mass, There's a warehouse across the street. The largest train yard north of Boston is next to the warehouse. That's sort of the neighborhood I grew up in. And being a real estate mogul wasn't a part of the conversation.
So if I track back to the book, the No Money Down book, how did that end up in your hands? What was,
There's a bookstore in Cupertino at the time. Might still be there, might not. It's called a clean, well-lighted place for books. And I was like, oh my God, I've graduated. I don't have to read what they want me to read. And I have a bit of money. And on Sunday nights, the bookstore's open till 11. And I can go browse the bookstore and buy books that I find interesting. And Nothing Down was one of them. And there was a definite element of, at the time, there were some rather attractive tax benefits. And being a single male with no deductions beyond himself and making what was definitely above average for a salary, not today's stratospheric Silicon Valley salaries, but very good. It's like, yeah, I could do with saving some of this tax if this works. And real estate had two things going for it that I liked. One is, okay, I lived in houses and DIY, do-it-yourself type projects that my father had done, or friends or cousins or something, you know. So the idea, the mechanics of how you take care of a house seemed easy enough or normal enough. And it was heavily geared, based on Nothing Down, towards, can you do the numbers? You understand the math? And we're talking simple algebra and a few other things. But fundamentally, like, I'm a software engineer. Of course I can. You know, I dream in math or something like that. So like, I get this. This could be fun because it's tangible, it's physical, it has tax deductions, it's numerical. The deal is the deal. If the numbers stack up, it's not emotional. I'm not trying to be on the emotional scale at this part of my career. I'm more about the detail of the numbers.
so it all just clicked and made sense. So the book happened.
Yes. Now, before you go before the book, there is one thing I want to highlight,
Sure.
which is got nothing to do with real estate until much later. So as part of my day job at Hewlett Packard, I was one of the co-authors of HP's Unix definition or standard. So we spent 2 years working on that in text-only group conversation, no meetings, 2 years. So we developed the Unix standard for HP through online. So my day job in 1982 included being paid to be online. That was a more or less an internal community, and some external people. Wasn't the way you think of social media today, but I was definitely online back in the dark ages. And that meant you're sharing a computer. We had maybe 15 people, 10, 15 people sharing one computer. You don't get your own. And that computer has a modem that talks to another computer. And that other computer talks to another computer. And if you wanted to send a message from where I was in Cupertino to the team in Fort Collins, Colorado, and then occasionally the other team in France, you actually had to know the explicit routing of every machine in between. So you'd say, go to step 1, go to step 2, go to step 3, basically. So machine A, machine B, machine C, and you'll find the person on machine C. That's how you sent email.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, it was different. It was different. But it's still, what's funny is it's also very much the same. People are people. So I remember we had this meeting after 2 years, and it was in Cupertino. And I remember the guys from Fort Collins rocking up, and one of them, he's sort of got a beard, sort of long hair, bit hippie-ish, very chilled. Oh my God, you're AJS? Now, when you don't use names, you just use handles or nicknames. So his initials AJS. It's like, it was so shocking because in my head, after 2 years of dealing with him, the guy's a jerk. At least he's a jerk online.
Okay.
And here he is, this mild, relaxed, sort of easygoing sort of guy that was easy to talk to. But when he's online, he's very sort of toxic or caustic. And I had been reasonably good at interacting with, so eventually the person leading the whole effort said, hey, I need you to post something that says the following so that we can get AJ on side. And, so I became the go-to person for difficult conversations. And there's a repeating theme later in career. But yes, the key there is I was online very early. I was online before most of the norms were established and before the tech really could do much for you. And that was important later. In fact, that's how you and I met.
True, true. So if you could go back in time, and this question actually has two parts to it, so I'll unpack it for you. How many years you've been investing now?
40 plus.
40 plus. If you could go back in time to John 40 years ago, what advice would you give yourself as a real estate investor getting started? And then I'm going to fast forward it today. What advice would you give to a newbie, probably watching this for the first time, to get off the fence and get started today? So we'll take you first. What advice would you give to yourself?
Probably don't be so lazy and do more. It's very easy to, in effect, park activity or do less than you could have, that sort of thing. Now, there's an element to that when it comes to take action. You also have to enjoy your life. So I enjoyed my career. There's lots of it where I wasn't investing in real estate because I was trying to get out of a job or get out of a career or something. I actually enjoyed it. So there was no particular need to get out. I was well paid. This was a side hustle and it was probably never meant to be primary. Though these days you could argue it's primary, but that's a different story. So the other side of it was learn to raise money, but recognize that you have to, it isn't just about networking and talking stuff up or spewing stuff on the web. You have to learn to raise money because the limit to how much you can do is a function of how much you can raise. There's always motivated sellers. The motivated sellers come from death, divorce, dependency on drugs and alcohol, job change, things like that. So people always have a personal reason why they need to sell more than they need to get best price. If they are under pressure to sell, you can say, look, I'm not going to help you out. You might as well go screw yourself. Or I can solve your problem. You're not going to get the best price because I need to make a profit here. Mm. So if you take the view that there are times in people's lives when it's more important that they move on than it is that they wait for the best price, and they'll never know if the best price is the best price. Well, those are the motivated sellers, as we would call them. And motivated sellers are motivated not because of the real estate. They're motivated because of their life circumstances. There may be a few people who are motivated because the property's got a defect that they can't fix. If you have a cracked foundation and a structural engineer buys it, they know how to deal with it. You don't know how to deal with it, fine. But most of the time, the motivation is the person's life. So learn to deal with people, learn to deal with motivated sellers, learn to figure it out. And on the flip side of that, learn to deal with passive private investors who want a piece of the deal, understanding that you have to do it within the legal framework. And the legal framework changes over time. And the legal framework is very country-centric. What you can do in Aruba is not what you can do in the US, which is not what you can do in Canada. There's similarities, but don't assume that, well, I know I can do this in the US, so I'm going to just blast it out to Hong Kong and hope I don't get arrested the next time I visit. It's like, that's not smart. So advice to self would be move a little quicker, learn to raise money privately. It's particularly a useful skill, and it's a whole lot easier now. Now, you want to do advice for people who are starting out now?
Please. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. So it's all about building your brand. And I did a summary of Grant Cardone's process. He very graciously shares it publicly in one particular recording. And then I saw him in a couple meetings with a group of people. It wasn't just me and him. It was a group, but it was a group small enough that you could be in the conversation, so to speak. And it's a very classic process, and it's mostly driven by people again, which is you have to build trust. and you have to build a track record. And the sooner you get started, the sooner you work on building trust and being good at delivering on what you say you're going to do and recovering from mistakes, because crap will happen. Over time, you get to the point now where you have an audience. And as Grant highlights, it's probably easier to not focus on the real estate, focus on something else, like in his case, auto sales training, where he's building community, he's building audience, he's amortizing the cost of building that network. In today's lingo, this is the internet funnel, building your audience, building your list. Okay. And it's your lead magnet type stuff that goes to the middle of the funnel. So you want to get to the point where you have something that's sort of short cycle and short loop and pays back so that you can reinvest and grow. Real estate's a slow moving game. Real estate, you could do really well, but you get older like you and I. And that's when the really good stuff is sort of like, it just keeps coming in. But you have to plant those seeds. It's like growing acorns, growing oak trees from acorns. It's going to take a while. And it might be a few generations past you even. So think about having a purpose, a way to do what in lingo of computer science, minimum viable product. What can you do quickly, prove that there's some demand, build some relationships. If we want to use the analogy of dating, you want to have a lot of first dates. And the only purpose of a first date is to figure out if you're going to have a second date. And the way you get a lot of first dates is you bribe people. Hey, I'm really thirsty. I'm going to grab a coffee. Would you like to come and we can have a quick coffee? You're literally paying them to come chat with you. Okay. So you want to build that momentum and you want to start to discover your purpose, discover your strengths and your superpower and your zone of genius, all this other stuff. And I can go into a lot of detail and structure it and fine detail. I'm an engineer. Of course I can structure it. But the point is, get started. Focus on building that personal brand. Focus on delivery. If you wanted to learn how to run property, be a property manager if you can't afford to buy enough to practice. There's a lot of things you can do to get your reps in that will accelerate things later if you put the time in now. Now, if we did this, if we made a second recording, maybe I could actually get that down into step 1, step 2, step 3.
You would be welcome back as a guest whenever you would want to come back on. No problem there. Just want to recap real quick here. For yourself, learn to raise capital, take action. And for you, it wasn't so much that you had to do real estate. You enjoyed your life. You enjoyed your job. This turned into something that I'm guessing turned into something you probably never imagined it could be.
Well, at some point, you'll probably ask about my best deal.
I will.
And we'll just tease that a little. So I was talking to a venture capitalist back at the time. He's long since retired. And he said, you've gotten VC returns without the VC risk. I said, what are you talking about? He goes, well, you've gotten the percentage target returns we're looking for, but you didn't have the downside. So in the deal, I had made quite a bit. And he goes, even if it didn't go well, it wouldn't be a total wipeout. Where as a VC, we back software companies and we're lucky to get used furniture and bad leases after we're done and the company's folded, unless it goes well. So it was funny. I then said to him, well, do VCs invest in real estate? And he said, well, not really. We tend to stick to what we know. And while we might have a house or two or more than one house, but it's not for investment reasons that we're doing it. It's what you do with your money. So you're doing as well as we do, and yet you're not taking the risk we're taking. Well, that's pretty good. I can live with that.
And here we are.
Yeah.
And then for the newbies, build your brand, know your purpose, get started. And I like what you said, the minimum viable product. Now that I would boil that down if you are getting started. There's so many different flavors of ice cream when it comes to real estate. Pick that one thing that you're going to be known that would be the guy I'd go to if it's a rehab or a single family or whatever it is. Be the best in that space that you could be, that you could possibly be. I'm not saying you have to be the Grant Cardone of the world and the biggest, baddest, and all of that.
Well, let's pick that apart a little.
Please.
Grant Cardone's real estate career took 30 years to get past more or less the second house.
Oh my God. All right.
Yeah, he says, hey, you know, I bought this property, I had it for a while, and I sold it because I panicked. And then it took a while before I got back in, and it was a side hustle, back burner, just what I do with a little extra money. It was not my focus until he was like 60 or something.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah. He's literally my age. I think he's 64, so not my age, but I'm a little older than that, but I believe he's his mid 60s. And people can look it up and verify it. His empire is mostly since just before COVID and grew quite a bit during COVID. But how did it sort of take off? Because he built an audience and he learned how to do that. And he learned how to do it not with real estate.
A lot to think about and unpack on that one.
Oh yeah. Well, I told you, a 1 page. So in Europe, we say A4. In the US, we'd say letter size 1 pager. That here's the 6 steps, the big themes of Grant's sort of real estate career and what you need to do for each one of those. It's already boiled down.
Maybe 6 months. Want to come back?
Sure.
Hey, we could have a nice tax deduction for you if you want to jump on a plane and sit on a beach too.
Yeah. Well, you know, as long as we do half a day of work, then we can call it a business meeting, right?
Well, if I look out the window, there is real estate everywhere. So we could definitely make that qualify.
So, as some people might have guessed, the image that is behind me is actually a photo I took, but it's a virtual location. And let me find one that shows you the beach I would work from, because I've done it from the balcony multiple times.
I anticipate the setup here. Love beaches. I'm barefoot.
So this is the balcony from the property in Hawaii that I own.
Oh, wow. Very nice.
And if you work London hours, you spend your morning where you're overlapping a little with the UK. It's not great, but it's enough. And then by the time the sun gets to the point where you're no longer in the shade, you can then move down to the water and just sort of hang out under the umbrella.
So I see an island in the background on the horizon,
Mm-hmm.
off the veranda there.
So this is Maui looking out at Lahaina, not Lahaina, Lanai and Molokai. And this is probably 6 miles, because I would walk from here, north of where the fire was in Lahaina.
Oh my goodness.
So I would walk down to Lahaina and back as sort of a way to get exercise. And you walk along certain beaches, then you cross over here at a certain place, then you move up onto on the roadway for the last little bit into Lahaina, which obviously now is going to have to be rebuilt. So
Yeah, we actually
it's
just
funny enough. So I'm from New England. You're from New England. Lahaina was it has a long history in the Hawaiian culture. It was the center of government for the king, but it was also where a number of the New England whalers operated out of.
Huh.
So it has this New England connection too.
I did not know that. It has another New England connection as well. A couple months back, one of our residents, he was a contractor, he was a builder, nice guy, had him for a long time as a resident. He said, "Hey, Brian, I'm going to move." I says, "Okay, well, what can we do to help?" He says, "Well, I'm going to Maui to help rebuild." I says, "What can I do to help you?" So now he's down there rebuilding some of what happened there, which it's horrible.
Well,
But
so to go into a little, because this has happened in different places, and they had the big fire in Oakland. They wanted to rebuild, and they wanted to lay out the streets so the fire trucks could get through. And they they ran into the ownership problems of like, well, we're going to have to take land from these owners to make it into a wider street or something. Oh, we're going to have to not make that a buildable lot anymore. And the same with Lahaina, that if you're trying to respect the past, you do it excessively in a way that says we want to rebuild in materials that burn well. But the problem on the island is when the cattle ranching left, they had put in a lot of grasses that were good for the cattle ranching, but in the sugarcane fields, when those get cut down, well, this grass grows really fast, but this grass also dries out really fast and it causes fires. So it's not a native grass, but it was brought to the island for agricultural reasons. And the same with, maybe the sugarcane, that there's this rolling history. And if we go back to the London image, so close to where I live in London, there's a number of historical buildings, and historical in that they were around for a while. And funny enough, they wanted to then build some tall buildings because the city wants to grow. And the local community was up in arms about it. Well, we like it the way it is. And it's like, well, the Romans settled here. And a lot of people since the Romans. You just want to keep the bit that was here when you bought in. Well, 100 years from now, I'm not so sure that those people are going to care. And 100 years ago or 200 years or 500 years ago, like, it didn't look like this. So why do you get what you want when they didn't get what they wanted? So there's this, how do you deal with change? How do you deal with transitions? The fact that COVID says maybe we want bigger second and third bedrooms so we can have home offices. Maybe we need better fiber connections and other things. So this constant change in how to be, as an investor, how do you adapt? And one of the things that Grant Cardone has done well is he's effectively done 2 registrations in type. So under the SEC regulations, you cannot do retail promotions, or you can do retail promotions. Well, he's basically registered some of his deals so that if you're a retail investor, we have a path. If you're a qualified accredited investor, we have a path. So therefore, I can now run what I'm running on the camera. Well, he wasn't legally able to do that till the Jobs Act passed and they changed the rules. It took a little while. So he couldn't have done what he's doing now 20 years ago. The rules didn't exist. But now he can. And people don't understand that.
Yeah, so the 506C, I think of as commercial, which you have to have accredited. And then the 506B, I think brother, where you can have anybody come in that is not accredited.
Yeah, or Reg A, which is a Reg A plus, which is how you can do even broader marketing as long as you do more auditing. So in the UK, we have a different set of rules, but it's similar, where now the regulators have appreciated that social media is pushing the envelope. So how do we protect the public from itself? Because the public likes to be protected when it goes bad. But when things go well, they don't want any protection. We're libertarians, da, da, da. And then we want to bail out if things go poorly. So it's, how do you tread that fine line? Anyway, we can go into lots of tangents.
It's your show, John. We can go wherever you want to drive this bus.
No. This is your audience.
Okay, but we could go back and forth on that. So I'll just roll out the next question here. So
Go.
What's that?
Go.
Go. Okay. So we're going to talk about some properties now. What's the best deal you've ever done? What type of property was it? How did you find it? How did you finance it?
So Nothing Down the Book, which is still a great book, was all about putting the least amount of money into a deal. But it was also quite smart by Robert Allen about the least amount means the least amount from you. Whether a bank or another investor or someone else puts up money, that doesn't count in the Nothing Down. So Nothing Down is defined as 5% or less. So one of the things you learn over time is while you're highly creative and there you go, there's the book. Yeah. You can be highly creative and think through lots of details. You at the same time find most deals don't benefit from that creativity. the needle in the haystack. But if you do find the needle, you want to be able to whip out your best solutions. So it's about sifting through things, and the world has gotten easier when it comes to the internet. Do you want to know how the web got started?
The
How
internet?
the web was invented?
I'm going to take a stab at it and then you can correct me.
No, I'm asking you. Do you want to know? I know the story.
Oh, okay.
I
Sure.
was there.
You were
And,
there.
are you a computer gamer?
I am not. No.
Okay. Well, for the audience, it is, and I'm not much of a gamer. There's a sort of seminal game that many know, Doom, 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 and Quake, and they're from id Software. Those were invented for almost the same reason the web was invented, in a sense. And that all comes back to one guy at Next. So there's more to Next than meets the eye. And then we could talk about Pixar too, but we'll park that. So let's go back to the property stuff because I'm just teasing people.
No, I
So-
enjoy it. I enjoy it.
Yeah.
Please, go ahead.
So I've done deals where like literally nothing down, flexible contracts, option agreements. I even did one deal where I turned the deposit into a tax deduction because of what the seller signed. What was essentially the down payment was being paid for a tax deductible activity in the sense that I was paying them for something and therefore I could deduct that. And in lieu of that, I was given the credit of the down payment and all that. Now, would that have stood up to full scrutiny? I don't know, but it would have had to been audited, but it was, as far as I could tell, legit, and the accountant was happy with it. So yeah, I've done some creative stuff. The one that turned out to be the best, which I touched on earlier, was this very vanilla deal. I was running a software consultancy in the UK. I wanted to, the family was moving back to Oregon, but I was going to maintain a residence in London. And also I wanted to be a live work type space. So I could use part of it as the office and part of it as the residence. So I walked into a unit. It was in a particular neighborhood. It had been advertised in the newspaper. So this is very vanilla, agent-led, whatever you want to call it. Nothing special. I walk in, there's 15-foot high ceilings. It's just a shell. I immediately say, I'll take it, because it was the only one in the whole thing that had 15-foot high ceilings.
Nice.
It was a converted warehouse. And it had approximately 1,000 square feet could be used as the working space. And the rest could be a one-bedroom, what I would call a flat. You would say an apartment or one-bedroom condo. Under the law in the UK, more or less condos are flats. So if I say flat, just think condo.
Mhm.
And because I was buying it off plan, meaning it hadn't been built yet, they had the shell up, the physical concrete structure. They were working through, there was, I think, 4 buildings on the site. This was not the one they were working on, but they had already poured the concrete, so the shell was there. And they were struggling a little with the legislative rules around live workspaces. It was a special designation, and they would say planning, US would say zoning, whatever.
Sure.
So I say, fine, I'm happy. There's no rush. So, here's my 10% deposit, so to speak. And under the UK system, we effectively have exchanged contracts. It's a binding commitment. I don't have title, but I'm legally bound to it now. And they have that money, and they can keep that money if I don't finish. And they ended up being late because they had a problem in one of the other buildings. So it took an extra, instead of 10 months, it took 22 months.
Nice.
But the market was going up quite strongly at the time. So some changes going on personally with me, doesn't really affect the deal, but it's sort of impacted how it was financed. So then when it came time, you're given 10 days notice. Like, okay, we're ready. Are you ready? And I had actually brought in my own architect to fit it out a certain way. And when they were doing the project, they had segregated office space for this utility area for the complex. There was 100 units. in the little development. And this is literally right at Tower Bridge. I mean, we're talking 7 minutes to Tower Bridge. It is prime London, cobble streets and all the rest of it. And they say, oh, well, we've changed our design. We don't need that space anymore. And it's like, okay. And I'm the only one that can buy it because there's the street, and then there's the driveway for the whole unit, and then there for the whole complex. And then there's 2 sides of my wall. Like, well, I'll buy it. And I didn't even negotiate. I just said, look, I'll pay you the same per square footage as I'm paying for the rest of the space. So I was buying about 1,000 square feet, but after I had the mezzanine put in, after I got this extra space, I was up to like 2,200 square feet. The whole time, though, my 10% deposit is on, I think it was a 220 or 230 purchase. So let's say it's 23K as my deposit money. And it sits there for the 10 months, which turned into 22 months. I can't touch it. It's legally going to be theirs, whatever. Well, the property I was buying, when you added it all up, I think the combined purchase 220 plus, I think another 50. So I think it came out to 275 or something. So the bank appraiser, we would say valuer in the UK, rocks up and says, fine, what value do you want? Well, essentially not what value do you want? What loan amount are you looking for? Because this is now suddenly trendy, hot area, super high value neighborhood. And from what I can tell, you're buying it at way below that. So I was all in at 270 or something, and he valued it at 550. And 2 years later, because of a personal relocation, we were moving out of London. I was able to sell it for 750. And that was the original transaction where I got 1,000% return on my 23K over 22 months. And that's when the VC said, those are VC type returns.
I'm running some math here, which you'll probably be able to do in your head. So at closing, you closed with 275K equity.
Yeah. I mean, I could have had cash back if I wanted it, but it was like, I didn't feel like having the bank give me money. I was like, fine, I don't, just make it the number I need to close rather than give me cash back, which is essentially saying you're borrowing more than you need to close. So therefore at closing, they give you a check. Cash back being a very UK phrase.
Yes, which I'm guessing the equivalent would be cash out refi.
Except you're not refining, it's cash out on purchase. You're walking away with the check if you buy this property. Here's the money and here's the keys. Because the property is worth that much more than you're paying for it, that we're going to give you some cash too, just because we like you.
And
so it's more than 100% financed in that sense.
So the gentrification over 22 months made that happen. So
yeah, well, because of I added this mezzanine, we created a second bed, sleeping area, bed area, loft space. We had that extra room added by that corner unit. So suddenly I went from a 1 bed plus kitchen with workspace to a 2 bed plus living space plus kitchen and the whole work area. And the work area now had that much more space in it.
So I'm guessing in the 22 months, the litigation cleared for the workspace.
Yeah, well, it wasn't litigation. It was that in the other building, they had put in the plumbing and then it all broke. Ooh. So someone had misdesigned it and it flooded it. So then everybody that had moved in had to be moved out while they go fix all the plumbing and repair all the damage.
So for the newbies out here hearing this, flooding in a property is bad.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, actually, there's 2 things that someone said on a podcast recently. The 2 worst things you can have is water, because water will find its own way and it creates damage everywhere. And he said in his opinion, and he's a guy in Massachusetts, no less, funny enough, a lawyer, he said having a sex offender move in, because then your property's on the sex offender list, and that's generally not a good thing for attracting future tenants.
Yeah, I'll add a third thing, fire, because you will end up with water damage.
Yeah, well, yeah, actually, you don't even need a lot of fire to have a lot of water damage. The fire could actually be quite contained, but when they hose the place down, it's like, oh man. And if you're somewhere like you are now, where there's high humidity,
No.
water damage and mold is, oh, nasty.
Yeah, we are crazy on that. We've got humidifiers up here, down there, so we have a
Yep.
nice crisp atmosphere here. So I'm going back to your vanilla deal here. So you had 23 down, had to wait 22 months. You closed with 275 equity. 2 years later, 3 years later, you sold it for 750.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
And
so
then, and the parking was another 20K. I sold the parking separate to the property. So 775 or whatever.
so with the equity you picked up at closing and the 750 at the sale at the end, not even considering the parking, yeah, 1,000%. You cleared $1 million on this deal.
Yeah.
Not bad for a flat.
No. And it was a really nice space to live in while I was there.
Even
We,
better.
we, we had a custom table, dining table, whatever you want to call it, but it was 3 meters by 1100. So think of it as 10 feet by um, almost a yard wide. And you could see 12 people, 15-foot ceilings, 10-foot windows looking out into the courtyard. It was good. It was very good. And you could walk to Tower Bridge very quickly.
It was nice and cozy, small little cozy
Yes.
environment. Yes.
We have dinner parties.
So
That's where
just for the peeps out there, the book that John keeps referencing is this one right here. I believe this is the one, John.
well, actually, Nothing Down, not for the 2000s. This was Nothing Down in 1982. So I think it came out in 79. And that's the more modern version that's slightly updated. But yes, that is close to the exact book. And someone argued that many of the things in that book were cloned from an earlier book. So a different way to hear this is very little in real estate is new. House hack is the classic one. What is a house hack? Well, it's something people would do when I was growing up, that they buy a rundown place and they fix it up.
Yeah.
It's, but now we get a cool term for it. Yes, house hack.
And then we've got the Burr strategy, which I used to call milk money before.
Yeah, and Burr is, in the UK, we call it rinse and repeat.
Rinse and
So
repeat.
it just means, buy it, repair it, fix it, refinance it, rent it out, move on to the next one. So,
Hey, if it sells books, right?
well, I do like is Silicon Valley's taught me sometimes you invent words to get people to hear things differently. Sometimes if you called it the old title, the old name, oh yeah, I've heard that before, and people tune out. Where if you give it a new name, and because there's something subtly different, they will pay attention. So
Very good, very good. We're doing okay on time, but is there a second deal, or do you want to move on?
yeah, let's move on
Okay.
rather than a second deal, because we can get to the whole raising money and what's different these days, which sort of ties into what someone new starting out should be thinking about.
Excellent, excellent. So as a real estate investor, what is the biggest hurdle you've had to overcome, and how did you solve it?
I mean, beyond water?
Well, what's the biggest hurdle you've run into as a real estate investor, and how did you figure that out?
Well, there's two. Water is definitely one of the biggest problems, and water will cause problems, whether it's water that creates mold or water that creates dry rot or other things. Humans need water to live. We live in houses that have sinks and tubs and bath showers and all the rest of toilets. And when water leaks, it causes tremendous problems.
Mhm.
But if we then say, well, what else is a problem? It's a slow moving asset class. And you're not going to prove that you're doing things well quickly. And as an example, I remember one guy, he had come up with an innovative way to rent to students in the UK. And I remember sitting with them at a particular Sky Bar looking out over the Tower of London. And I said, well, all you've done is proven that you made the same mistake 200 times. And he argued that it wasn't a mistake. I said, yeah, it is. And I talked him through what the technical detail was that he had gotten wrong in his contract. So the way he was signing a rental agreement, as you and I would call it, it wasn't legal the way he was doing it, but he didn't know it.
Ouch.
And I said, so because your test case hasn't been fully flushed out, you've repeated the same mistake 200 times, and it's going to take you a whole year to flush out all those students and get them on the correct contract. So you need to do damage control in the meantime so that everybody comes out okay. But just because you've been able to do it more than once doesn't prove it's right. It just proves that you made the same mistake more than once.
Are you at liberty to share what that issue was?
Well, he thought he could label the contract a certain way, and because of the label, the substance would change. And no judge would ever put up with that. It's like, it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck. You call it a goose. It's still a duck. Okay. So I don't care what you put on there for a label. And in this case, it had to do with if you had a certain type of agreement by law, but if the material facts were correct, then you didn't have to protect the individual's deposit.
Ooh.
Where if it wasn't of a certain type, you did. And he misunderstood what the boundary conditions of the test conditions were. So he was not protecting these deposits when he actually needed to. And there was penalties that could be applied if anyone wanted to take him to court. So it's similar to in the world of short-term rentals versus long-term rental contracts in the US. There are jurisdictions where you can't have short-term or you can't have long-term because of the zoning. And no matter how much you dress it up, the substance of like, are they moving in? Do they have another home? How long are they staying for? There's breadcrumbs that start to show, no. I don't care what you call it. This is what's going on. So,
yeah, in my world,
the key,
go ahead.
The key with real estate is it's a very old profession, it's a very old sort of sector. And there are laws that have been on the books for a very long time. And they aren't always rationalized. They sometimes conflict with each other. And you have to navigate that. There's a legacy that people, sometimes when those laws were written, thought, well, it's just the rich bastards, fat cats, landlords, the lords who were owning property. And you could argue, even with racism, some of the original rules about who could vote were based on you had to own land. And women didn't generally own land, and African Americans didn't own land and other things. So those were ways to restrict or constrain people. And then there's stuff sometimes left in the title deeds that's no longer valid. So when you look at the Landlord Tenant Act, you have to understand what the rules are, what best practice is, which rules that might be in conflict with other rules probably won't be enforced, and how to mitigate if you ever did get called out on them. So you need to know the law. You need to know the marketplace. Now, if you're ethical and you treat people with respect and you have clear sort of rules for when you rent to people, what you screen for, then you don't run into issues with discrimination. And again, it's a somewhat complex area. It's also because this is going to be someone's home generally, if we're talking residential, it can be very emotive. And maybe the judge isn't going to kick them out even though they haven't paid the rent. So what are you going to do about it? You can't just not pay the mortgage. So as advice, you need to come up that curve, and you have to be careful that some of the things you think you're doing right, you won't know that you did wrong till 2, 3, 4, 5 years later. Maybe you're doing some plumbing changes. And it's like, well, that wasn't the right way to do it. And now I got leaks everywhere.
Ouch.
So it's a slow moving sector. There is lots of people out there already operating. So there's lots of good examples of best practice. Try to focus on the ones that are the most ethical, the most, they're not pushing the boundaries. They're not trying to overwork the system, because some of the people that are being the most innovative are really just breaking the law, but haven't gotten caught yet. If we get into security, fundraising and securities law, I can highlight how that's a whole set of issues. So
I do want to go there. I do want to, I mean, I got to ask the
keep
question.
going where you want to go.
No, I'm loving all of this. So you bring up some really good stuff. This all happened in the UK. Security deposit laws had to be a certain way. This guy missed that detail or put in the wrong word, which a duck is not a goose. Totally understood.
Yep.
Massachusetts, same type of thing. We can get called out for triple damages. So that $1,000 right
Yes.
off the bat could be $3,000.
UK is also triple.
Okay, so there it is.
Yep.
So if you've got 100 flats at security deposits $1,000 each, that's $300,000. That's a $300,000 mistake.
Yes.
I want to multiply this and pull back the lens a little bit here. John, you're in 11 different time zones. I'm sure you're looking at landlord-tenant law for quite a few different areas, and I doubt that they're all exactly the same. How are you juggling 11 chainsaws?
Well, let me highlight some. One of the things I did learn off the back of my time working at Next and Steve and everything is how to tell a story. And we used to talk about the reality distortion field, that what Steve said from stage sometimes was how he saw the future, not how it was. 11 time zones is mostly ocean. Hawaii to Bradford, Hawaii to London really doesn't have that many jurisdictions, particularly because I'm not in a number of the US states. So therefore, you eliminate the oceans, you eliminate all the other states. Now, I do want to highlight for folks, and you just slightly touched on it, every state can have its own set of rules for landlord-tenant type topics. Yeah. These tend to be state level things. Same with contractors, and whether you can work on your own property, whether you have to have a licensed contractor, whether you have to pull permits or not. Those are state level decisions. There are some cities that also have landlord-tenant type rules and regulations. New York City, Santa Monica, whatever. It's not good or bad. The point is you have to know the jurisdiction you're in. 49 states in the US follow English common law. One state follows Napoleonic law. So you're inheriting a French system. If you're going to do cross-border transactions, if you're going to be living in Massachusetts, investing in Oklahoma, you actually maybe have to have a legal presence in both, which might mean a limited company. Now, oh, well, I'm going to get it in Wilmington, Delaware. I'm going to go use the one in Wyoming. It's like, that's great, but you can't file an eviction in most states if you don't have a local entity. Well, right. Then I guess I'm going to cross-register, and I'm going to have to say that thing in Wyoming is now got a legal registration. Now in California, it's like, they don't mind that. They say, we charge you the same. It's very expensive, but we charge you the same, whether you have the company in California or you have the company in Wyoming and you just register here. So it's like a lot of good it did you on that end of it. Now, maybe you want the benefits of Wyoming or the privacy. Well, that's fine. Maybe there's a good purpose for that. But again, there's like these layers and layers and layers. Now, if you look at the model I have of what Grant Cardone's doing, most of that's not there. It's more or less vanilla. It's about finding enough people that want to invest and let Grant manage that money for them. It's not about being overly wacky with your lease agreements, your tenant contracts, how you deal. He's buying pretty much vanilla occupied multifamily residential properties that are not dodgy. They're not in bad neighborhoods and they're not complete wrecks. Okay. But he's able to vacuum up lots of money so he can then be the buyer. And as he said from stage once, he goes, the key is to know what you're going to do with it in 7 years, who you're going to sell it to. You're building this portfolio with the exit in mind. So you're buying properties not because you necessarily want those, it's because your buyer in 7 years will want those. So you're buying in advance assuming the people you're going to sell to don't change their mind. So
Yes.
again, it's know the rules, know the process, know your goal, focus on the target. If you're heading north, don't worry about all the stuff going south. Focus on north.
You bring up a really good point there. The old adage, what are the three most important things in real estate? People will say location, location, location. Just to put a spotlight on what you said, it's future location, future location, future location. Who are those future buyers in 5 years? You know,
Now,
see that, right?
Jeff Bezos has a quote, it's not what's hot or what's new. Focus on what's going to be the same in 10 years. So people like low cost delivery. People like fast delivery. They'll still like that in 10 years. So if we get good at that, we have an advantage.
Hey, all of my real estate peeps. This is Brian Lucier with the Why Not Real Estate Podcast. And this episode with John B. Curry went on for about 2.5 hours. So we're going to break the action here, and we're going to continue the rest of his interview in volume number 2 that you'll see in a couple of weeks. But for right now, we're going to zoom out of this one, and we'll let you get back to your normal life. If you do want to catch the full episode on our podcast, 2.5 hours, that's a great listen, uninterrupted. But for my YouTube viewers, we're going to break the action now and split this up into 2 different volumes. So, all of my real estate peeps, ladies and gentlemen, this is Brian Lucier with the Why Not Real Estate Podcast, seeing you on volume 2 of our interview with John B. Curry.